And welcome back to Otaku no Video. As always, thank you very, very much for joining me for my primer on visual novels, aka why the would anyone play a visual novel? This is a review of visual novels on two dimensions. This will be two videos. The first covering what are visual novels, why should we care, what are sort of the salient aspects of it. And secondly, I will go over a history of visual novels, which will cover this. It's really actually very interesting because there are, well, visual novels are one of the very rare cases in human history where porn turned legit. Imagine that. So let's start off by asking, why am I recording this video? Why should we care about visual novels? Aren't they just this weird little aspect of fandom? Well, not so much. I went and did some research and found some articles where some Japanese fans listed all of the anime based on visual novels over the past decade or so. Now, it's not exactly completely scientific, but it'll give us a fairly good feel. Here's how that charts out. So, literally, as of a couple of years ago, there were 10 times as many visual novels being adapted into anime as there were in 2000, 2001. And when you think about it, I mean, there will only be 60, 70 anime released in a given year. So the fact that 20, 30, 40% of the anime released in a given year are based on visual novels, that's a big deal. So yes, this has become a major, major element of the anime industry in general. So let's talk about that a little bit. So first off, let's define some of our terms. You may have heard a lot of different names for visual novels and things going around. Visual novels grew out of eroge, or erotic games. Now, these were basically just sex scenes strung together on a PC. I'll talk about that more in the second video. But they were just porn on a computer, visually speaking. Out of that grew dating sims. And dating sims are more focused on the relationships you have with the girls. There will be sex scenes in them, but the focus is more on developing your relationship with these girls, with the sex as kind of a reward, if you will. And then visual novels, the term evolved to describe the games that include dating sims and eroge and so forth and so on. Because now there are visual novels that don't contain any sex at all, and we need sort of this catch-all term. Now there are also terms like sound novels and adventure games and garuge. I'm not going to explain those because that would just muddy the issue, and I don't want to make this any more confusing than it already is going to be. But there are other terms sort of floating around. So what is a visual novel? Well, I could give you a nice, concise, pithy definition, but ultimately that's going to be so vague that various games that aren't visual novels are going to fall into that, so it doesn't really work. Or I could be really, really precise, but then there are going to be some visual novels that don't really fall into that, and it's just blah. So I'm going to do what actually Wikipedia and a lot of the other articles that I've read do, and instead I'm going to define visual novels based on the 4 attributes that I found most frequently apply to visual novels. Visual novels are almost always PC-based. They're usually ported to consoles. They almost all start on PCs. They are romantic or relational. So there's usually a set of characters you have some romantic interest in, or develop some interest in. There's a branching storyline, so your decisions change the story, and you may end up with a completely different ending in one or another. Compared to a game like, say, Halo, for example, where there's really one storyline which you have slight effect on, but you're really playing through one story. And that story is based on answering multiple choice questions, very explicit pre-programmed multiple choice questions, which branch that storyline out. Here's what a visual novel looks like. This is an example from a game called Exchange, a very hentai visual novel. So you'll get these pre-rendered backgrounds, this pre-rendered anime art that's layered over top of those backgrounds. It doesn't move except when transitioning from one line of dialogue to the next. So it's just static. At the bottom of the screen, there's a little text box with the current line of dialogue. So when you hit the space bar, the enter key or whatever, it will show you the next line of dialogue. And you'll also hear a voice actress saying that line of dialogue. So every character gets a voice, and you'll hear those as you advance through the story. And at certain points, it'll pop up a dialogue box in which you have to choose from usually one of 3 different options. And this will advance or stop the story in some way, shape, or form. And I'm sorry, this won't stop the story. This will move the story in a different way. So sometimes you'll get a different, slightly different tweak to the current scene. Sometimes it'll completely change the direction, and also your choices in the past may affect how the story changes based on what you choose here. Obviously, this blue thing is something that I put together myself. So there are a couple of different kinds of ways that stories evolve in visual novels. And I want to cover this because I think a lot of people have misunderstandings of the way stories are told in visual novels. This is the way a lot of visual novels are, and it's kind of the stereotypical branching storyline concept. You'll get a couple of choices early on. This is very, very simplified, of course. You get some choices in the beginning which have fairly minor effect on the story, and then your choices have greater effect on the story, leading up to endings in which you get the girl in various different ways. It may be a really great long-term relationship. It may be a short-term relationship. Who knows? You may get no girl at all, or in some of the more hentai-oriented stories, you may get all the girls. Obviously, like I said, this is very simplified. A typical visual novel will have several dozen decision points. There are also some stories in which the characters drive the story, and it's much more story and character based. So it's much more clear throughout the game which girl or which character that you're pursuing in the game. To the point where the game may explicitly say, which girl do you choose? This one, this one, this one, or this one. And the advantage of that is it gives you a much clearer vision of where you're going. And you can kind of enjoy the story more for the story instead of worrying, well, am I choosing the right thing now? All that kind of stuff. Then there are some visual novels where, frankly, there is very little effect. You have very little effect on the course of the story. Your choices may have small effect on the current scene or on the next couple of scenes. But it's really telling one story all the way through. And those may have an effect on the ending and which ending you end up with. But it's basically one story all the way through with variations. Now, when we think of visual novels, this is what we typically think of. The stereotypical, lots of cute girls, you get to spend time with them and choose, decide which one you're going to end up with. And it's this sort of dating sim romance thing. But they're not all like this. For example, Kana Little Sister is a game about a boy and his relationship with his little sister. And yes, it goes there. But the important thing here is that the story is very much focused on that relationship. There's actually one other girl you can end up with, but most of the endings involve you and this little sister. So it's not really this dating sim type story. It's really focused on this one particular relationship. Then there's also games for girls. This is part of the Gakuen Heaven franchise, in which you're a girl surrounded by lots of cute guys. And in case you're wondering, yeah, these games are more often non-sexual. It's more often just cute guys as opposed to lots of hardcore stuff going on, which is just kind of interesting. I also want to point out this is developed by a company called Spray. I love that name for a visual novel company, but anyway. There are also some visual novels that have no sex in them at all. Steins Gate is a techno thriller, basically. And there's no sex scenes whatsoever. Now, of course, this does raise the question, okay, so how much of visual novels do have sexual content? How many of them are hardcore? Frankly, the vast majority of visual novels, at least when they were originally released, have, hardcore sex scenes in them. But it runs a gamut. So, for example, Snow Sakura is a game in which you can play all the way through the game, and there will be only 2 brief sex scenes, and pretty vanilla sex scenes at that, with the girl you choose. And it's very story-based, very character-driven. On the other end of the spectrum are games like Cosplay Fetish Academy, in which you and a couple of your childhood friends are teleported to a world where the girls, all girls around the world, wear these incredibly skimpy outfits. And so it's just an excuse for girls in skimpy outfits and sex scenes. But again, that's a spectrum. Now, the other really interesting thing about visual novels that has really colored the medium is the release schedule and how they're released. And this is important to understand. And I'm going to illustrate that with the release the various releases of the visual novel canon, of which more in the next video. So canon was originally released as a regular edition for the PC and a limited edition for the PC. You could choose which one to buy. Limited edition had more nice stuff, basically, but same content. Then it was released as an all-ages version for the PC, so all the sex scenes were removed. Then it was released for the Dreamcast and the PlayStation 2, but both of those versions included new content. It was all ages, but there was new CG in there. So then it was re-released to the PC as the standard edition, which had the content from the Dreamcast and PS2 versions, plus the sex scenes. Then it was re-released to the PlayStation 2 as the best edition, which had all that new content, but with all the sex removed. Then it was re-released to the PC as the standard edition again, but this time with all of the sex content removed. Then it was released to the PlayStation Portable. Then it was re-released to the PC yet again in a Memorial Edition that had all the new content with all the sex scenes removed. So imagine being a fan of canon when it first came out. You choose between regular and limited edition, so okay, fine. Maybe you buy both. Then it comes out for Dreamcast or PlayStation 2. There's new content. You gotta decide, maybe I should buy one of those, see what's in there. That's kind of cool. Then they release a PC edition, which has all that stuff again. You can kind of see it all in one package. You get the sex scenes plus the new content, great. Then you get the best edition for PS. Then you get the standard, and all these things change things in slight ways. So yes, they're really milking money out of this because each of these will be an $88 game, roughly speaking. Games are expensive over there. So yeah, this is how the industry kind of milks money from its fans, unfortunately, in all these different editions of the visual novels, because it's not hard to insert new content in there or whatever. It's just layering imagery, basically. So those are the salient aspects. The next segment, the next video is going to talk about a brief history of visual novels. And that's what I think is particularly interesting, is you get to see how this medium has evolved. So I hope you stay tuned for that. Thanks for watching.